Vanakkam. Happy evening to all, both on and off the virtual dais. Madurai bench has turned 16, sweet 16, so also MBA. The bench that was formed in the year 2004 has grown up steadily from infancy to adulthood. MMBA has also etched its name in bold and golden letters as the premier bar association at Madurai in the annals of the history of Madurai Bench. In commemorating the 15th anniversary of MMBA and the Madurai Bench, MMBA stands apart as the torchbearer. As a part of the celebrations, Team MMBA 2019 to 2020 has been organizing a series of law lectures in the name of Quindecennial Lecture Series. Shri Shekhar Nafte, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India, has delivered the inaugural address, and so far, Honorable Mr. Justice R. Subramaniam, Honorable Mr. Justice T. Raja, Honorable Mr. Justice N. Satish Kumar have delivered erudite lectures. Today, we have the benefit of hearing the fifth lecture by Honorable Mr. Justice Amareshwar Pratap Sahi, the Chief Justice of Madras High Court. At this juncture, I fondly recollect a much acclaimed verse of poet Avvayar, a doyen woman poet in Sangam period of the rich Tamil literature. Varapuyara நீர் உயரும், நீர் உயர நெல் உயரும், நெல் உயர குடி உயரும், குடி உயர கோன் உயர்வான். That means when the ridges are deep, irrigation flows well. When irrigation is copious, cultivation blooms. When cultivation blooms, the citizens flourish. When the citizens flourish, the king is glorified. The said corollary applies to the legal fraternity as well. When the law students do well, they become good lawyers. When lawyers do well, the bench dispenses justice to their best. And when justice is done without fear or favor, the society is benefited. And when the society is benefited, the rule of law is held high. It is in this context the topic of this day assumes greater significance. Having heard the special addresses of the chief guest of the day twice at Madurai, we are 100% sure that the loud thinking of the Chief Justice would be loved by all. MMBA is immensely pleased to join hands with Lex webinar series in hosting this webinar. Without harping much on the subject, may I now request Ms. N. Krishnaveni, Senior Advocate and the President of MMBA, to welcome the Chief Guest and the august gathering.
Good evening to all. In Bharat Kalachar, we have lot of traditional practices that would enhance the values and virtues of way of life. Welcoming the gathering in a function is neither ornamental nor figurative. After COVID-19, the scenario of entire world community has dispensed with the Western concept of embracing the greeting with the gesture of using the folded hands by saying Namaste as Vanakkam in Tamil. In virtual gathering, the participants are perceived as unison. In this backdrop, I welcome Team MMBA, its officers, members of the executive committee, and the participants who have gathered here virtually. I also welcome the honorable judges of the Madras High Court to this momentous occasion. I welcome the judges from the subordinate judiciary and all the designated senior advocates, learned counsels, and the young members of the bar to the webinar lecture. By his special address, our chief guest is all set to enlighten the occasion with his enriched wisdom in philosophy and law. I wholeheartedly welcome Honorable Mr. Chief Justice A.P. Shaghi to this lecture series. Before handing over the floor to the chief guest, I request the General Secretary of MMBA to briefly apprise the audience about the Chief Justice.
Good evening to all. On 24th September 2004, Honorable Justice A.P. Saki was elevated as Judge of Allahabad High Court, and it is a matter of pride both for the Chief Guest and for the people of Tamil Nadu that the warrant of appointment of the Chief Guest was signed by none other than Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, the then President of India. In November 2018, our Chief Guest was appointed as the Chief Justice of Patna High Court, and he assumed the office of the Chief Justice of Madras High Court in November 2019. Justice A.P. Saki was graduated and enrolled in 1985. He practiced in civil and constitutional matters. His graduation was in philosophy, and that is reflected in his thought process, judgment, and discourses. None other than our Chief Justice can do better justice to the topic. And MMBA takes immense pleasure in presenting the 5th lecture of Queen-Decennial Lecture Series. Saint Thiruvalluvar, in his epic couplet called Thirukural, has written the virtue of person who are dispensing justice. Couplet number 542 reads as follows: Van nokki valum ulagellam, mannavan kol nokki valum kudi, which read in English as follows: The earth looks up to the sky and thrives, and mankind to king's rod of justice. As the creature of the world look upon the rain for survival, the citizen of the country look upon the baton for justice to all. And our Chief Justice is befitting example for this saying of the saint. With this note, I hand over the forum to Mr. Srinivasa Raghavan, co-host of this webinar series and one of the member of our advisory committee of MMBA.
Thank you, Mr. Ilango. Justice delayed is justice denied. Justice deferred is also justice denied. I don't want to stand between justice and the audience. May I now request Honorable Mr. Justice Amreshwar Pratap Sahi, the 29th Chief Justice of Madras High Court, to deliver the special address on the topic of the day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Srinivasan. And good evening, everybody who is now connected with me through this virtual court system that we have now adopted. This system of communication has now established that all barriers have been overcome, and direct natural justice is being realized through this system of communication. So this communication also itself is a manifestation of the principles of natural justice. The word justice occurring again with the word natural, as you see, itself explains that this is what actually man aspires for. This is the minimum. And we begin today by remembering that justice is an abstract notion. It is something which is realized by the manifestation of certain rules and regulations which man has formulated for himself to discipline himself, meaning thereby that the concept of justice through the means of law is an end to be achieved, which you can say only when there is some conflict. So this is the foundation of the thought of today's topic, where the means and the end, in my opinion, would have to be just. It is not only the end of justice, it is not only the achievement of the end as justice, but it is also the means, that is the law, which have also to be just. The reason is justice has to be achieved. There is no doubt about it. That is the ultimate aim of every law. But the means to achieve justice have also to be just. Justice cannot be achieved by devious methods. And therefore, I would begin by referring to a slok from Mahabharata in Sanskrit, which is necessarily to be remembered to understand this abstract or remote concept of justice, where law is used as a means. And I refer to that slok of Mahabharata, where law is referable as dharma. The slok is that when such situations arise, and as I began by saying, unless there is a conflict, you need an equilibrium. In order to achieve that equilibrium, what Lord Krishna says, and please excuse me, I am slightly a religious oriented person, and therefore there might be non-believers who would be listening to me. But I'm just trying to derive that logic from religion and not to offend anybody's feelings on this. The logic is, according to that slok, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srija meham, which clearly means that I descend only when it is necessary to remove injustice. So it is this idea, this central theme. And as I said earlier, when there is a conflict, when there is a reason to remove injustice, that by taking the help of dharma, because when dharma is being destroyed, it is necessarily to be set right. And it is here where the Lord transcends, which we can call is to establish the rule of law as also through just means. Mahabharata is one of those epics which very, very vividly indicates also the means and the ends and the justification to achieve the means and the ends through just means. I think there might be many young lawyers listening to this webinar. We should broadly understand that law is a concept of set of rules that is devised by man in order to regulate himself, rather discipline himself, and rather more particularly, in the words of Aristotle, to establish a legal order. And not only a legal order, but a just order. So it is this announcement of this basic principle of a philosophy of laying the foundations of civilization, that is of a just and legal order, that law has been made. The means, therefore, that is the law framed by human beings, necessarily has to be a framework of something virtuous and moral. Unless that is present, nobody would follow it. So the force of morality is behind law. And the source of justice is also morality. Now we should not confuse ourselves, because law and justice are different concepts in today's modern world. Law is what we can say legal justice. That is necessary because the binding effect of law has to be presumed on the principle that there cannot be an adverse impact of a law, meaning thereby law cannot be said to be unjust unless we, through our tools of interpretation, declare a law to be so. So it begins with a presumption, as all of you know, that whenever we test the validity of a law, whether on a constitutional basis or a legal interpretation basis, it has always to begin with a presumption in favor of the validity of the principle of law. That is the moral force which the sovereign has given. And you will find that throughout our Indian constitution, you will find the word justice occurring in the constitution once or twice. Otherwise, it is all law. The realization of justice is the ultimate aim of law. And for that, we explain this duality by fusing it with each other. And I have been very frequently making this statement in courts also, that law is good but justice is better. This moral state of affairs for both law and justice is necessary. Otherwise, it loses its binding effect. I think many of our lawyers would be conversant with the theories of distributive justice and corrective justice.
Yes, Milord.
They are meted out through law. But yet they are called distributive and corrective justice. These legal concepts, when they fuse together, that is made possible only through that moral force. And it is appropriate to presume that whatever laws we impose on ourselves is only to achieve the ends of justice. Nobody creates a law for injustice. So therefore, what I would say is that law is the tool for eliminating injustice. Justice as understood according to law. There is yet another very interesting topic on this, which many of our legal and social scientists have adopted. Justice as a means through law, and justice as a means even without law.
Without law.
Yes. So there are many philosophers and scientists who have said a lot about on this. But the fact remains that all these theories, like the flow of rivers merging towards the sea, all these legal principles merge into that ocean of justice. There is yet another interesting thing about justice, which I came to know through during the years of my practice, and also read about it. Justice M. Jagannath Rao has written a book about the infallibility of the Supreme Court. And while writing, he has described the statue of justice which is there in the Supreme Court. What we all know normally is that justice is blind with a blindfold, holding the scales of justice. But there it is different. That is our traditional and the concept of justice as understood in our ancient civilization. With the deity with 4 arms and not blindfolded, but rather opening the eyes through which the rays of justice seem to emerge. We have, apart from the Western understanding of justice through this symbol and our own understanding of the symbol of justice, there is yet another third dimension to it, which people say, and this is the extreme thought, that justice is something cynical. It can go either way. And as we say in slang, either it is my way or it is highway. For this, we have to understand some recent trends in modern times. It was there when we go to the United States prior to its independence and even after independence. We had the Wild West. We have seen history, and the medieval age was full of barbarism, in spite of religion being at its height. We have seen many more systems of civilization, and in this age of freedom, we have seen democracies, communist countries, monarchies still surviving. But what we have found in all these ages is this third dimension of justice, which I was mentioning, namely cynicism. Even today, and in our society, even though very rarely, we have instant justice. We have instantaneous justice. We have roadside justice. We have mobocratic justice. And we have justice in its crudest forms, where morality has no place. Is that also a form of justice? I say this because this third dimension of cynical justice is still prevailing in many parts of the world. Well, in my humble opinion, this does not stand the test of that ultimate moral, or you can say that cosmic equilibrium of justice. It only indicates an irrational behavior. And justice, according to me, cannot be irrational. There is reason behind law, and there is law behind every justice. So to conceive of justice through unjust means, as I began earlier, is, in my opinion, not the correct way of trying to find out justice. Cynicism, therefore, only leads to what we can think of in a tyranny or an anarchy. these are antithetical to any form of justice. And as a matter of fact, they are injustice. So what we have to understand is that these are various modes, the various means to achieve something which man wants to be ultimately satisfied with. It is an ultimate form of satisfaction, that sense of achievement that comes in you. And that is what has been delivered to every man, what is due to him. It is this satisfaction which can be said to be achieving of the ends of justice and through just means. I will now slightly switch over to certain elements that have been described or that have been enunciated by various people. And this is for the younger lot to understand. Whenever they find time, I think they must have read the trial of Warren Hastings in legal history. If they go slightly deeper into what Edmund Burke was trying to explain to the House of Commons, it was nothing short of the concept of justice. And it was only through the moral force that he was trying to make people understand that, look here, justice has to be achieved through just means. It cannot be purchased. And that is why I will now refer to a couple of quotations which I have been using, and I find them to be quite near to what we are talking about today. The first is that of Disraeli. He says, justice is truth in action. A very simple quotation. Justice is truth in action. After all, what are all these institutions of justice meant for? To arrive at the truth. And I'll come to this later on. The means to achieve this justice is law, which constitutes broadly for our listeners, particularly the younger lot, in two parts. One is substantive law and the other is procedural law, because at times youngsters, when I was also young, I used to get mixed up with this. Procedure is the handmaid of justice. And we would end up by trying to formulate our own opinions, whatever we found. That all right, if a comma has been left out and if the full stop is not there, it hardly makes a difference. But what I have found in experience is that the commas and the full stops of law all have their significance. And therefore, procedure is equally important as a substantive law. I'll come to that later on. After Disraeli, who says justice is truth in action, I move on to Dante Alighieri. The reason is I find his definition of justice being that definition which should be adopted as a course by those who are entrusted with the task of delivering justice. Not necessarily judges, but even on the moral ground, those who profess to do something which is just. The said definition also, in my opinion, should be kept in mind. Alighieri says, justice is a straightness, certain straightness. He says justice is a certain straightness or rule. But the next phrase is very important. He says justice is a certain straightness or rule, rejecting the oblique on either side. Now this is quite subjective in nature. Rejecting the oblique. Now your concept of oblique may be different from mine. But the straightness, that is the aim of achieving a just end, appears to be common in all of us. The rejecting the oblique on the other side also includes there should be certain principles on the basis whereof we reject this oblique. There are many who say that there are forms of government in this world which reject the oblique by using one bullet. But in a civilized world, even this method of rejection being prevalent today is what we have to understand when we are trying to achieve what we are discussing today through just means. Can such a utilization of a bullet be said to be a just mean? I was conversing with some of my friends. They said that examples are not far to see, and some proponents of abolishing the death sentence say that even if you are using a rope, what difference does it make? Because that is a state-sponsored murder. It is very subjective in nature to explain things. That justice also has within its fold something retributive, something reformative, something curative, and something at times detrimental. People forget all these four elements. The need of society to keep it holding together on this moral foundation of justice. I find that all of these four elements are necessary. And this belief is on account of that presumption which I had talked of earlier. And I find that the Supreme Court has very beautifully used it in one of the judgments reported in 1996. It is a 3 judges judgment delivered by Justice K. Ramaswamy. He put it very beautifully that the effect of law cannot be unjust. Now this presumption of a just law has to be in tune with what the society realizes to be just. And it is here that I would again remember one of my most often quotes, that when Napoleon drafted his code, he asked people, what did they think of the law? Somebody said that it is draconian. Somebody said that it is one of the best after Hammurabi's code. But Napoleon said, being the emperor, that law is best which is respected by the people most. So therefore I say, in a society, the justness of the law has to be presumed, particularly in a democracy where we function and where we have a representative government. It is with this thought in mind that one has to apply those laws or consider the application of laws as to be A just means to achieve the ends of justice. When we are living in a particular time and space, whether it was the Treta or the Dwapar or the Kali Yuga, whatever be the space of time that we can define, or whether it goes to infinity, and wherever there is a human being, there has to be an order in which the human civilization has to exist. I'm coming to this, that the very existence of human civilization through a social order is necessary to understand this concept of universe, this concept of existence of human being, therefore is directly connected with this role of discipline and the morality and rationality behind it, to canvass this principle that the means and the ends both have to be just. It is in order to avoid any such a disruption of the human mind, the peace of the human mind, that we have to presume this. And unless we do this, we will be inviting anarchy. So therefore, whenever we frame a law, now this is for our lawmakers, the law should therefore always furnish for a just foundation. Whenever this tussle is brought to the fore on the issue of equality and inequality, laws are unequal and therefore they are unjust. I also at times quote George Orwell. Some animals are more equal than others. This is the oft quoted sentence of George Orwell. These quotations come up, these thoughts come up in every age. It is not only that we are talking about it only today. And that is why I began with that slok from Mahabharata. And even today, look at the biggest democracy of this world, the United States of America, with its minimum amendments. The Constitution very proudly pronounces, even though in practice it is something else today, but it says we have to achieve what? The pursuit of happiness. Now that element of happiness will be possible only if you feel satisfied, if you feel that there is a just order, if you feel that you are being preserved and conserved carefully and you are being looked after by society carefully. Well, as I stated earlier, today, in today's time, in order to, as Mr. Raghavan pointed out, justice delayed is justice denied, and all these things are there. But we should never forget that at times, any form of quick, feverish, or swift action, which is based more on a public cry or an impulse or even on a compulsion arising out of a particular situation, cannot be said to be a just means to achieve the ends of justice. That is, in my opinion, a complete miscarriage of justice, as we use the connotation. Now, I'll come to the second part of it. This was dealing with the concept of justice, law, the concept of morality, the concept of rationality behind law, the concept of reason has to be there behind law, and therefore, it is that concept which fulfills the ends of justice. But what our younger generation needs to know more about today is that equally important is the role of procedure to achieve the ends of justice. This role of procedure is important. The reason being, when we talk of discipline, when we talk of order, rather a larger concept within which civilization thrives, then you have to have simple rules, and the younger generation should realize that there is even an etiquette of how to address during a video conferencing. There is an etiquette of dress. Only yesterday, we had an order from the Supreme Court where somebody lying down on a cot on a t-shirt had addressed to the Supreme Court. These are simple matters, and it touches upon what I am talking about, that is procedure. The reason is, I could have very easily squat on the ground and talked with you on this video conferencing, or I could have also lied down on a sofa and would have conveyed myself without any visuals. You see, when man started evolving, primarily he had two sources of trying to discipline himself, and for which every civilization involved a concept which is called religion, to keep that civilization united into one. The other is that concept of self-preservation, where the individual, as against the society, thought of protecting himself. This is very well explained in Matsya Nyaya and many other forms of legal principles, where and even in our Indian Penal Code, the right of self-defense is borrowed from those concepts. The individual trying to protect himself and the society trying to contain itself. Individualism and socialism, they all come together when it comes to seeking justice. Both seek justice in their own forms, but through different means. And that is why procedure becomes important. A man will have to drive his vehicle on the left-hand side of the road. Why? A person will have to stand in the queue, even if the queue is for Tasmac shops. A person will have to buy a ticket in order to board a train or any means of public transport. A person will have to obtain a driving license, and he will have to have a passport for going abroad. Why is this all necessary? Why is it necessary that we should use A4 paper in all our judicial proceedings? Coming to something more personal, why is it that we address our parents respectfully? Why is etiquette necessary? Why is a particular form necessary? Why can't you play the guitar with a cricket bat? These are very fundamental things that you have to understand. And I believe, that is absolutely personal, I believe that the seeds of such understanding are sowed not in schools or in homes, but in the environment and the company that we keep, whether it is of parents, whether it is of school or whether it is of society. That environment automatically teaches us to self-discipline ourselves. Even though such disciplines are broken and at times people break the queue. But why is it necessary to have a queue? If you are able to understand this fundamental, then you will be very easily able to understand why is procedure required. The first moral principle that I have learned is that this gives you a moral understanding of what is right and what is wrong. It shows you the way how to keep an empty glass and how to keep a glass filled with water. You get this discipline by experience, and as I said, with the environment in which you live. Because I have a certain belief that in today's time, I'm not talking of those earlier days, but in today's time, life is something like water in a swinging bucket. It doesn't spill over, but the art lies in how to handle that swinging bucket. You have to keep, water will contain itself, and it should be measured in a way that it still remains in the bucket and you safely carry it to its destination. But still it is a swinging bucket. And therefore, you have to time the pendulum of that swinging bucket. It is for this reason that you achieve the end destination by going through a procedure which will facilitate the approach towards that end. A left-hand drive going on a road will facilitate your safe drive to your destination. It is therefore that sense of achievement, of perfection, of achieving what you are going to have in the end, that this discipline and procedure is necessary. So the youngsters have to understand this, that we have all this procedure in place only for the reason that nothing goes haywire and everything appears to be in order. You must have seen the gavel being used, order, order all the time. It is only for that reason, because justice flowers where there is tranquility. You can't have the theories of justice being discussed where swords have been drawn on a battlefield. Therefore, the procedure is the foundation of that tranquil method by which you can very easily sail through a civilized method of attaining the end. And that is why you have the procedure of filing a plaint, of getting it registered, of having a number, so that everything can be located. And the next is, once you have this tranquil or peaceful method, the next is, this also ensures transparency. Procedure, therefore, becomes important because of transparency. It lets you know as to how things are moving. And this is one of the facets of natural justice. Rather, entire procedure or procedural law is nothing else but a manifestation of the principles of natural justice. And it is called natural because it is required naturally. If you want to have something done in a just way, then it has to have a particular procedure. Therefore, procedure is a handmaid of justice. Law is the tool, but procedure is the handmaid of justice. You please acknowledge these words in this way, that without this handmaid, this end of justice in a transparent and a tranquil atmosphere may not be possible. Up till now, all systems in the world, whatever be the system of governance, they have a procedure. We have a summary procedure, we have a detailed procedure, but we have something. The third thing is, it is that vehicle which lays a solid foundation for the running of a system. This is also important. An order which is run on discipline should also have a system, an orderly system. And therefore, you have to have a calendar of dates. You have to have the manner of how you are going to address the court in order to ensure that your adversary knows every step. It is not a hidden affair. So therefore, this vehicle of transparency in a tranquil atmosphere is to avoid what? People taking law into their own hands. It is to avoid violence. It is to avoid disorder. And therefore, procedure plays a very vital role in the administration of justice. You will realize that procedure also contains jurisdiction. The very forum where you are going to get that adjudication. It also prescribes the time and also the resultant effect of any adjudication which may appear to be just. So it is procedure which is an aid or a device that helps you in achieving justice. I'm connecting it with my opening sentence, opening remarks on this, that it is not only the tools which are to be just, but it is also the journey which we have to travel to achieve justice is through just means and not devious methods. I hope I have fairly covered the broader points, but I would like to add while concluding that whosoever are the students of law and whatever stream they belong to, whatever school of thought they belong to, they will agree that when the constitution framers framed the constitution, they adopted what we call the words of the US Constitution, that we the people have given unto ourselves this constitution on the 26th day of January 1915. Now, why was this said? This was said because everybody realizes that the ultimate power of governance lies in recognizing the sovereignty or the source of sovereignty. And in our democratic system, it is the people who are sovereign. The question is, are people today asking you to obtain justice through just means, whether in the lower courts or the high courts or the highest courts? All the just means are being adopted and are being either way offered to achieve this end of justice? This is a question which can be answered better with the aid of those who may call themselves to be the propagators and the soldiers of justice. But the fact remains, whosoever they are, they have to ensure and they have to give themselves to a commitment. And the only commitment which I beseech all of you, that please achieve the ends of justice through just means. Thank you very much.
My Lord, I'm in search of words to thank your Lordship for such a erudite lecture. I'm not flattering. We don't believe in flattery. But to talk from the heart is something which is very not easy. And I should say that your Lordship has chosen to speak out of your heart. And we owe a lot to your Lordship, especially the younger members of the bar should have been benefited. According to the session, if justice is the destination, law is the pathway. So while I'm walking with my father, holding his hands, I can only see a little bit of distance. But if I sit on his shoulders, I can see father. That was the days when we were brought up by our parents and grandparents. Today, the situation has totally changed. The youngsters are almost self-made. And there is no such question of elders being found as a source of inspiration by youngsters mostly. I don't mean everybody, very few people. In such be the case, what is your Lordship's advice for the youngsters to follow the footprint of the elders?
They should look towards nature. And the best example is the COVID situation today. Our forefathers taught us that whenever you enter the house, wash your hands and legs and then enter the house. We are wearing socks and shoes. We are entering anywhere we feel like. Because we feel that, please don't mind my saying so, I am protected. Whether others are protected or not, it is my least concern. So with my socks and shoes, I am protected. Let others see my shoes of what quality they are. This attitude, and that is why I said environment has a very great impact on the upbringing of a person. We have been imbibed with certain sanskars, what we call sanskars.
Sanskars.
Yes. And the lesson of moral science is not being taught in schools. Parents are busy with their mobiles and with their busy schedule of achieving the material ends with little attention to what is required as the moral backbone of society. So the reason is very clear. If the father has stopped picking up his child and placing him on his shoulder, and he does not have the time to do so, then the child is not to blame. One. The flip side of the coin is that we are distancing ourselves from nature. A child, and I take the extreme case, say an orphan, when he goes and wanders in nature without the aid of anybody, there is hardly a child who will not understand the difference of, I'm talking of a fairly matured child, in the sense that he has crossed infancy and is in his adolescence. So there is hardly any child who would not know the difference between the standing in the mid of a valley and on the top of a mountain. If he has to find the correct view of life, then he has to pass through the valley and he has also to climb the mountain, even if he is an orphan. But of course, here the duty from individual, I mean the individual father, passes on to the society. If a person living in a society finds that all the people in the society visit the Kapileshwara temple right in morning at 5 o'clock and perform their bhajans, there would be very few who would keep lying on bed unless they are priests of laziness. So there are some lapsed devotees in this moral structure. I would put it that way. But exceptions do not make the rule. One summer does not make the swallow. One swallow does not make the summer. I'm sorry. So therefore, I would say that it is all a matter of environmental impact. If everybody is going to Marina Beach and nobody wants to go to Elliott's, then the responsibility lies on the society which is doing so. So as I said earlier, in the case of an individual, if the father has stopped making his son climb on his shoulders and does not find time for it, then it is not the child who is to blame, but the parent.
Fair to me.
So therefore, child is the father of man. We have to be content with that. I will take it to the extent of the rules of current practice of advocacy, juniors and seniors.
Yes, ma'am.
There are many seniors who cannot afford to have many juniors. But such seniors can come together at least once a month and impart something to those juniors who do not have the opportunity to have the umbrella of seniors.
Yes.
Such a method can be evolved, which is known as continuing legal education. But nonetheless, there are methods by which we can resolve this.
Yes.
And the father can still make the son climb on his shoulder.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I understand. With Lordship permission, shall I move to the younger members of the Margula to raise questions before going to the
Yes.
judges?
All
Yes,
are
sir.
welcome.
I request Ms. Sella Vishalakshi
Yes.
to ask a question.
Good evening, Your Lordship.
Good evening.
Thank you for that enlightening lecture. So, Your Lordship, my question to you today is with respect to the anomalies that arise owing to the lack of review and revision of statutes. So often we find both in criminal law and civil law. For instance, I'll take the Indian Penal Code. The quantum of fine that was fixed in 1860 for most of the sections, that is still in force. But however, there has been so much inflation over the years, and right now the value of money is also appreciated over the years. That was almost 1.5 centuries ago. So what is your opinion on this, Your Lordship? Because I personally feel that the entire exercise of having alternative quantum of fine is completely lost.
Okay. I've understood your question. And now, since you are one belonging to the new generation of lawyers, please keep this in mind and ask this question to others also. Rather, put this question in different forms to others also. But I will tell you something which is very necessary to understand. When we deliver justice, we try to find alternative punishments. This is what the statute provides. You are referring to the quantum, but I am referring to the more jurisprudential aspect of it. Either this or both. This is how it is put. My personal opinion is, and it may be the opinion of others also, I do not know. We find for alternative punishments, but we hardly find, please mark my words, alternatives for punishment. What the law prescribes is alternative punishments. this much or this much with fine or this much fine alone. These are only alternatives of punishment. You are absolutely right. Whenever you put this question, I will be happy if you carry this debate further in the words that I have told you, that when it comes to deliverance of justice or application of law, whether it is archaic or whether it is modern law, what we are doing is we are finding alternative punishments. We should move towards theories and practice both. And here lies the responsibility of our lawmakers, law framers, Law Commission of India, or even the Parliament, and even the judiciary itself. Because now, with the proactive role that we have taken unto ourselves, there are alternative punishments provided. But at times, you must be having a look of this in some stray judgments, that instead of punishment, some other alternative is given, which is a form of retributive or reformative justice. Quantum, therefore, to my mind, may not be that important. Reform is required, there is no doubt about it. It appears to be ridiculous, because what you are saying is with regard to a token being awarded as in the shape of a punishment. But there is one more thing which you will find in criminal law, and you will find it in prison manuals or in other procedures. Even today, the diet amount provided to a witness is so low that the witness cannot even get a bottle of distillery water. So reforms are not only necessary, they are compulsory. But I believe that people who are looking into these things must be thinking about it. But I must tell you that courts have evolved certain methods of their own, and you are aware of it. When costs are imposed or compensations are granted. So this tortious compensatory method of deliverance of justice, whatever be the quantum, has now been incorporated in law, because in criminal law there are various compensations to victims which have now been provided. We have started thinking about it, and those provisions are now coming in place where a minimum of compensation is already there in place. So therefore, it needs to be reviewed. And so far as deterrence is concerned, your question was on deterrence. That after inflation, if you are asking for 500 rupees fine, there is no point in that insofar as criminal law is concerned. But if you find in other laws, for example, the Income Tax Act, you will find that the penalty is 200% or something like that, Excise Act, of the amount of evasion. So we have traveled quite far in those areas where it is ultimately necessary. It appears popularity weigh on the legislature when it comes to such fines being increased or decreased in the Indian Penal Code. Because you will agree to this, that most of them who get entangled in criminal cases, barring that top cream, they are mostly either the middle or the lower class. They can hardly afford. And I must tell you on the lighter side, because this will be relishing for all lawyers, when I was practicing in the Allahabad High Court, then client arrived on a rickshaw, and he alighted and he asked the rickshaw puller to wait for him, that after he meets his lawyer, he will come back and engage him again to go back from where he had come. So the rickshaw puller just asked him that, please be quick, otherwise I will be losing other customers. He said, no, I'm coming in 10 minutes. He kept his promise. He came back within 10 minutes and said, let us go back. He went back, and then since there was no contract as to how much was to be paid, he asked the rickshaw puller, how much do I have to pay you? The rickshaw puller gave a reply, you are coming back from your lawyer from the High Court. Whatever is left in your pocket, give it to me. Quantum part has to be remembered everywhere. Thank you.
That's an interesting answer, Milad.
Yes.
Next, let I move to Mr. Muthucharan.
Good evening, my lord. My
Good
question to you is this:
Yes.
justice cannot discriminate. Indian
Yes.
courts in today's time are seeing a steady increase in commercial litigation, but this does not mean that other disputes are not on the rise. Population boom coupled with other factors like increased awareness means that all sorts of disputes are increasing, not just commercial. With this in mind, it is my understanding that it is these other forms of disputes that best represent the plight of the common man. My lord, how are courts, according to you, performing an adequate role in India to balance the two to ensure equitable justice is administered?
The role of?
Are courts performing an adequate role in ensuring that commercial disputes are balanced with other disputes to ensure administration of equitable justice?
You are right in your question. This boom in the nature of litigation has seen different dimensions. And I'll tell you from my own experience as a judge and as a Chief Justice from the data which are available and which are real data. You see, what has happened is that the attitude of every litigant has changed. He does not want to hover around in courts and wait for long in order to get a decree from a court of law. So therefore, there is a sharp decline in civil litigation, pure civil litigation. But what has happened is that there is a steep rise in criminal litigation. All civil matters, whether it is the cancellation of a sale deed, is now being given the shape of fraud and all these things, and 419, 20, 467, 470, 468 is now being utilized for pressurizing somebody to get around that sale deed. So this is the trend which has changed. The result is increase in criminal litigation. The second is unemployment and the vagaries of youth in these modern times have given rise to criminal activities of different natures. And you are very well aware of this, that one of the most difficult crimes to solve these days are cyber crimes. So there are different types of crimes which have been taking hold of our courts, and we have been increasing special courts and creating special jurisdictions, whether it is POXCO, whether it is NDPS, whether it is even on the commercial side. But speaking for the commercial side, we have had a global impact. Please don't forget this. It is not only the impact of our society. It is because of certain international commitments that now we have an expanding forum of several adjudicatory institutions, whether it is arbitration, whether it is conciliation, or whether it is any form of adjudication on the commercial side, even commercial, special commercial courts, commercial appellate jurisdictions. They have been created in order to resolve certain disputes, keeping in view those international commitments as well. So our indigenous litigation is now trying to fuse with those international level litigations. And it is for this reason that we can perceive more laws being made in order to provide more forums on the commercial side. But that is not to say that we are neglecting the other side. The other side has simply changed sides, as I was pointing out. And therefore, it is only a matter of number, how to handle that number. Now that of course, somebody says increase the number of judges. I say increase the number of competent judges. Increase of judges doesn't make any difference. It is the best of the selections which have to take place in order to deliver as fast as one can and rather expects today. So even that part, not only judges, the best of legal education is also necessary. Usha series, we have had enough. We don't want Usha series. Lawyers should be fully equipped with the best of law. And it is not that we didn't have good lawyers before, but we had the best law colleges 30 years hence. They were less in number. There is a growth in the numbers of people seeking this legal profession, but they are not getting good colleges. They are just getting forums of degrees. This is also adding to this woe, because what happens is that if an untrained mind who did not have the benefit of a good legal education, he finds it difficult to express himself in the legal language, whether it is native or whether it is English or any other language, to express what his client or litigant wants. So if you can't write a simple application on account of this deficiency, you are adding to the woes in spite of the fact that you are holding the monopoly of this profession. This problem is also adding to it. When lawyers are the monopoly, then that monopoly should be given effect to in the best possible way, and not with people who have half-baked knowledge of law or practically no knowledge of law. This is creating a problem. So adding, it is not that the commercial courts are getting an upper hand, but the fact is that commercial courts fortunately have some of the best lawyers also, corporate lawyers. So that is what is known as the vagaries of a profession. But you need not be disheartened by this. I could understand your question well. There is a lot of sun, there are a lot of opportunity under the sun for everybody. So if you pick up any line of profession and if you start earnestly on it, you will find that these lines get obliterated, and some of the best lawyers are on the civil and the criminal side. They are engaged for corporate matters. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Milord. Let me now move to Ms. Aishwarya Sandalina from Madurai Beach.
Yes, Your Lordship.
Yes.
If I may ask, Your Lordship, thank you very much for the pragmatic and logical approach towards the topic. And if I may say, Your Lordship referred to Mahabharata in the beginning. And as per my understanding of Mahabharata, I think it's all about achieving a very greater justice, even if it has to, resort to what seems to be very an unjust way at times. So if that is the case,
That is why I refer to it. Yes.
yes, Your Lordship, if that is the case, if we are if justice is supposed to be given the priority than law itself, justice being a very subjective term as such, because justice sometimes it might relate to equality and sometimes proportionality, and it differs. And when that is given more importance than law itself, won't it create some kind of chaos, on the practical version of it, Not sure.
That is why I kept on hammering to this, and I refer to that. I'll just refer to that decision. You read it, because
Yes,
this is what this is. Indian Administrative Service Association versus Union of India.
Yes,
1993 supplement, volume 1.
Yes, Your Lordship.
SCC page 730.
730. Okay.
The reference is just 2 lines, that
Yes, Your
the
Lordship.
effect of law can never be unjust. I put it a different way. The same thing.
Yes, sir.
Whatever is legal is just. You have to begin with this presumption.
Yes, Your Lordship. But if that is the case, then why are laws being tested in the first place? Because if Your Lordship says that a law has to be, a law should be enacted on basis of justice. If a law
Yes.
is enacted on basis of justice, then
Yes.
why should there be even a legal test for a law?
Very simple. That is why you people should read the Indian Evidence Act. There is a difference between presumption and assumption.
Assumption.
Yes, Your Lordship.
Please read the Indian Evidence Act. The presumption of a state of affairs does not necessarily mean that we are assuming the correct proposition. And that is why it has to be tested. You have to test it to find as to whether it is just or not. A law will be just only if it is found to be just, not merely because it is law. The presumption is that if it is law, it is just. But that presumption is a rebuttable presumption.
Yes, Your Lordship. But the term, as Your Lordship says, but the term justice itself, ain't it? I mean, whether a particular thing is just or not just, I mean, it itself is very subjective.
Very subjective. You have to be very careful. That is why I gave two definitions. One by Disraeli, justice is truth in action, and the other by Dante Alighieri.
Yes, Your Lordship.
That
Yes,
is
Your
why.
Lordship.
Yes, yes.
Much
Thank
obliged,
you.
Doctor.
Thank you, Aishwarya. Okay, let me move to Mr. Parthiban of Madurai bench.
Yes, Mr. Parthiban, welcome.
Yes. Thank you so much for such a wonderful lecture, my lord.
Yes.
Today's webinar topic took me to my college days, my lord. When I did my graduation, my jurisprudence teacher gave me an assignment about social utilitarianism.
Okay.
While doing research on the topic, I came across a book called Law as a Means to an End. Famous book by Rudolph.
Yes, Rudolph. Yes, you are right.
When explaining about socialistic ideology, Rudolph expresses that the purpose of law is to protect an individual and a societal interest.
Yes.
Whereas, when comparing to the past era, today we are introducing many new laws to cultivate discipline among us.
Yes.
Yet, the crime rate is just increasing exponential, my lord. So my question is, my lord, is law protecting us, or we are introducing many such laws to protect the law from us?
You see, as I said, when there is a foundational defect in society, then the society tries to find out ways and means how to cure that foundational defect. Now, the society which has now come up, and this has not happened today alone, it also happened in the past. If you remember the Industrial Revolution in England, or some of the laws that created a lot of trouble in the United States, that gave rise to crime. When we try to just one sentence about it, there is no difficulty in making laws and applying them. But what you are talking about is the trouble begins when we start equalizing justice.
Yes.
This is where the trouble begins, because we find that laws are inadequate, and then we start equalizing justice. The end of justice, according to law, has to be there, as I said earlier, because we have to live in a society. We are going framing laws, we are increasing it every day. The government is claiming that they have deleted thousands of archaic laws, but we are in an age where we find ordinances, even constitutional amendments, going up to 120. This law was never certain. And please remember, you have been a good student, law is not absolute. Whatever is found to be rational today, For example, I'll tell you in property laws, just see the question of equality keeps on touching our minds. Ownership of land is one of the primary sources of all disputes, particularly our country, our background.
Yes.
And ownership of land is also considered to be very, very dear to a man's heart. And it is with this end in view that the policy of socialism, of distributive justice, particularly of land reforms, began in our country right at the beginning with the abolition of zamindaris and rayats and all these things and distribution of land. But you just see, there were two laws broadly framed for the equal distribution of land. One, in all states, we have the Rural Land Ceiling Act, where it is prescribed that an individual or his family can own certain amount of land. The rest of it is declared surplus and then distributed to landless people. Then came the Urban Land Ceiling Act. How long did it survive? You people keep on arguing the Urban Land Ceiling Act. How long did it survive? So when it comes to this, the people do say that we are working under the sovereign will of the people. But one cannot say whether they did it with the sovereign will of the people or they did it with some other motive. So therefore, laws, even in today's context, you will take, for instance, electoral laws. Why is it so complicated? Why are the courts questioning these laws? And why has the Supreme Court stepped in with directions under 142, calling upon the Speaker of an Assembly to do his duty, when prior to these decisions, the action of the Speaker was unquestionable in a court of law, constitutionally protected. But still, why is this being done? The reason is too many laws, too many confusions. Simplification of laws. You just imagine, I do not know whether the Law Commission of India is functioning or not. I do not know as to whether any debates and seminars are being organized for deleting those laws which are absolutely unnecessary or are further complicating issues. If that is done, this job of courts to interpret laws, to find them as to whether they are just or unjust, their constitutional validity, all these things can be reduced, because one of the reasons which I understand today is, in this background of global impact, that things are changing so fast that our laws are not changing to that speed. That is not compatible with it. And we still lag behind. So this discussion, the formulation, the implementation, and then the forums being provided for it, it takes so long that by the time we make a new law in order to supplement the old one, we find this new law to be quite old as compared to others. So this law-making agency, which of course is the legislature, in my opinion, should spend more time and more effective time in formulating laws to an extent that they do not provide with this opportunity of litigation. Not to say that the lawyers are to be put out of business or the courts are to be closed, but to say this, that please marginalize it to an extent
Yes,
by
yes.
by trying to uh, understand what has been interpreted by the higher courts or what is being talked about even by academicians. You just imagine, I'll give you just one illustration. There cannot be anything more precious than fundamental rights.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
And there cannot be anything more precious to us as a matter of law, the Constitution of India,
Exactly.
mother of all laws.
Yes.
But did you see how Keshwanand Bharti was argued? Keshwanand Bharti was argued on the strength of a talk delivered by Professor Conrad Dietrich in 1965 in the Banaras Hindu University as to what is the basic structure doctrine. Mr. M.K. Nambiar requested Professor Conrad to allow him to use that article. And so did Palkiwala when he opened his arguments in the Keshwanand Bharti case. In Golaknath, it was used by M.K. Nambiar. In Keshwanand Bharti, it was used by Mr. Palkiwala. Both of them,
Yes.
they were unable to find any other law. And they got it from Germany. Because the German constitution has in it the eternal clause. That is what is known as basic structure of the constitution. So just look at us. Our constitution makers and lawmakers and future lawmakers, God knows what they have in mind. But it took that paper to make a 13 judges bench, largest bench and the longest drawn litigation to understand as to what is the basic structure of the constitution and why it should not be allowed to be destroyed. Because when law is destroyed by the lawmaker, then the lawmaker becomes a lawbreaker.
Exactly.
So we have to go that deep to understand every piece of legislation, every ordinance, as to whether this has been made with the intention of settling the law, or is it in order to generate something or protect something which cannot be otherwise protected under the normal law of the land. So you have to examine every law for that matter.
Yes, my lord. Thank you, my lord. Thank you so much.
I want to thank Parthiban for two things, Milad. Number one, having asked a meaningful question. Number two, having not forgotten what was taught in the law college.
That's good.
That's right. May I now request Mr. Vivek Tulasiappan of Hero to interact with the Chief Justice.
Thank you, Lordship. Thank you for the wonderful session. And I have a specific question with regard to the civil litigation and the current legal infrastructure for that. As civil litigation can be tried in 3 to 4 layers of forums, judicial forums, Your Honor.
Yes.
And now time has become a major factor and a constraining factor to our legal practice. Do you think such layers of forums should prevail, or do we need a revamp or reduction in the number of appeal courts?
Now, you practice on the civil side or the criminal side?
I basically practice on the civil side, Your Lordship.
Civil side means pure civil side?
Not exactly, Your Lordship.
I know.
I do appear on criminal cases too, but I primarily practice in a district court.
Now, you see, old habits die hard. I have been to civil courts. I know what civil courts are. Had you been a regularly practicing lawyer at the civil court, the first question I would have put to you is, how many adjournments do you seek in one case, and how many adjournments have you sought in one particular case? I would have asked this question to you, but leave that aside. You just see how a civil suit begins and commences. It commences with the lodging of a plaint. Now, the first thing is that the plaint should be appropriately framed, keeping in view the relief sought, the cause of action, and the substantive law involved in the case. So the lawyer who is preparing the plaint, in my humble opinion, should be fairly trained in envisioning his case in future. He has to take all this precaution while drafting a plaint. Now, how are plaints being drafted in the civil courts? I have seen lawyers copying the plaint of others, just like in computers. It may be possible for a 138 bail application or a 138 complaint, but when it comes to a civil suit, when it comes to a declaration of substantive law, then how can you draft a plaint unless you have studied that critical question of which you are going to be the propagator in a court of law? For example, I tell you, what are the usual civil litigations that you get from the rural areas or even from the urban areas? They are pertaining to possession, encroachments, drainage, passage, easement, inheritance, succession, and the like. Now, this is all pure substantive law. If you have not read the Easementary Act, you will not know what easement is. If you have not read what is estoppel, you will not understand what is acquiescence or estoppel. If you have not read what is evidence, you will not be able to make your plaint pliant with whatever possible evidence may be thrown against you. It is a matter of, you see, just like an army general. He plans the war on his war table. He does not fight it out and then plans it. He plans it on the war table. So a lawyer's room is the war room. And there he has to plan it. Now you have practiced in the civil court. How many lawyers did you find of this nature who were a composition of substantive and procedural law, having envisioned the case and then drafted the plaint? There would be hardly 10%, if I'm not wrong. You don't have, the reason is those who are seniors, they hardly have any time, and those who are juniors, they have hardly any patience. They want a very quick progression in the profession, and by simply moving applications under section 151, even at the execution stage, they'd hardly know the distinction between what is 151, what is 152, what is 153, what is order 32. They, with all due respect, even once they have not read the CPC properly. They have just read those chapters which were sufficient to pass the examinations. That's all. And thereafter, the Civil Procedure Code is lying in dust. It is not difficult to read it. It is not even difficult to understand it. But it is certainly a matter of effort to apply it. When it comes to application, you have to be careful where to place what. So this, neither is there any training of drafting, nor is there any training of understanding the law before setting out the plaint. Now the very foundation, if it is missing, what do you expect? Amendments, taking of adjournments. If the other side engages a very senior counsel, he will put you into other troubles, that it is barred by specific relief act, it is barred by this, it is barred by that. So many bars will be created that you will now start searching for it. Problem lies here, this litigation. And that is why I said earlier in answer to one of the questions, litigants have now understood it is no use fighting civil litigation. Lodge an FIR and the rest will be taken care of by the prosecution. This is what is happening. It is our own well, I would not say inefficiency or deficiency. As I said earlier, old habits die hard. So therefore, our senior lawyer, he has 50 cases. He is bound to take dates in 40 cases. What will happen? Delay, adjournments, because he is not free. Juniors are not learning it. They are not picking it up. Had the baton been taken by the modern generation, as we are finding in high courts, all 5-year law students are doing very well now. I must confess this, that they are some of the best, and in our age, we were not that best. Things are improving in high courts, but in trial courts, the situation is still Usha series. It is very difficult. It is very difficult. So we have to somehow the other think over it, and that the best method that I have experienced is continuing legal education, where seniors should go to those taluk courts at least once a month, tell them that this is the distinction between an application under section 151 where the inherent powers can be invoked, and this is a matter pertaining to execution of a decree. Please apply order 32 rules so and so. These are the things which need in practice, which are required now today in practice. So the armory is there. There is nobody prepared to pick it up and learn how to fire it. That is the problem.
My lord, may move to one of the sitting judges of our High Court to pose a question to your lordship.
Yes, yes, please.
And
Well,
your lordship may even guess the name.
Yes, I know.
NAVG, sir.
Good evening, Chief.
Good evening. How are you?
Fine, Chief.
Yes.
Fine, Chief. I was enjoying it to the extent to which all the other participants were enjoying it.
I never knew you were there. Otherwise, I would have been more careful.
I was also listening like a student, Chief.
Yes.
Just redolent with what was stated in our Dharma Shastra. If I am right, it says that the only friend who follows men even
Yes.
after death,
Yes.
is, for everything else is lost at the time when the body perishes. So
Yes. I'll read that Sanskrit slok for
Yes.
you.
yes,
Eka evam surdev dharma nidhane yashanupati ya sharirenam samam nasham sarvamanya yadhi gachati.
so since I'm completely ignorant on that side, I thought I convey it in a language which I
No, I had noted it down, but I didn't speak about it. The reason was that there are different ways of understanding.
yes. So the reason why I quoted this was redolent in when you were speaking about it. This was the background from which most of us understood what justice is, what dharma is. So with that in mind, Chief, the only question which I wanted to ask Chief is this. The one thing which always clashes in a justice delivery system is the perception of justice by the person who sits there and deliver justice and what is actually available before him. So there may be cases where a person with some sort of a preconceived mind or some sort of experience in the past, etc., would have branded certain things as only this. So with that in mind, what happens is that the facts that are presented before him will be seen with a particular view that it suits his sense of justice. So this is a clash which continues, Chief. So what would be your advice to all judges who are involved in the justice delivery system?
No, I will not advise judges, but I will give my the opinion which I have been following and which I think should be cautiously treaded. Your question is person-centric. That the person who delivers justice,
Yes.
his perception matters.
Yes.
This is your question. But that is not justice. Perception is not justice. Justice is what is due to that person. Now you will put this question the other way around, that in my perception, this is what is due to him. So therefore, you are identifying your perception which may or may not be due to him. What is due to him is what ends in satisfaction of what should be due to him. A greed of a person of acquiring somebody else's property is not due to him. But you say that no, section 64 and 65 of the Limitation Act disqualifies him now from having it. Then what you have to do is, now here your sense of justice should rise above and try to declare the person a trespasser, because a trespasser cannot claim that right of possession which you call adverse possession under section 64 and 65. If you read that judgment which has been recently delivered on adverse possession, this slight distinction has been left to save grace. It is here that justice will come in. You can drive that wedge where you find that that path, the treading of which may not result in injustice, is the just path. That which does not bring about miscarriage of justice is the just path. And for that, for judges, not my advice, but a request, marshalling of facts and then interpreting the law very carefully to the minutest level is very important. Because if you miss one fact here or one fact there, it turns the entire table. Yes. So therefore, justice is not absolute, just like law, to be very frank. But as I began in saying so, that we have to live in an order. And that order, equality of law, what is pronounced in the Constitution, you can't have a different law in a different situation and a different law in a different situation. But while delivering justice, the same law can be applied. For example, in criminal law, there are different levels of punishment for different activities. Now that is justice. That equilibrium that I was talking about, whether it is criminal law or whether it is civil law, ultimately you find that this person, he did require this treatment. But how to reach that goal of giving him that treatment, that should not cause injustice either to law or to any other individual. And it is all a matter of conscience so far as judges are concerned.
Yes.
That is why, again quoting Krishna Iyer, that if there were a higher court, 50% of our judgments in the Supreme Court would have been upturned. So nobody is infallible. We have to be, but we should know how to correctly do it. If we learn how to, this is what is known as the resilience of a judge. If you know how to correct yourself, I tell you from my own example here in the Madras High Court, I have done it several times there. You must be.
In fact, I was about to ask that, Chief. In fact, I was about to ask one example as to how you did it in a particular.
Exactly. I'm just telling you. I was sitting with Justice Subramaniam Prasad in that height measurement matter
Yes.
of constables.
Yes, yes.
Many writ petitions were allowed at Madurai and here also. But we took a different view. We did not agree with it that the High Court should now convert itself into a measuring chamber to find out the heights.
Yes.
Obviously, that is not the job of law, and this is no constitutional point.
Yes.
It is a matter of fact. So unless there is something perverse before you. Now here, the idea which persuaded us was that unless there is some perversity pointed out, stray examples cannot be utilized, and you have to separate the wheat from the chaff. So we dismissed a writ petition. But just 3 or 4 days thereafter, some more petitions came up, and those petitions disclosed a fact which was not there before, namely that the police department itself had carried out certain other measurements pursuant to the directions issued by the learned single judges in the other cases. And 27 of them sailed through. Their height was found to be correct.
Correct.
Now, when we saw those results being tabulated, then we called upon the learned Advocate General to verify it. And this fact was admitted in the affidavit of the state that after remeasurement was carried out, the results were otherwise. Now, this was something which you can say the perversity was disclosed, and you can also say which shocks the conscience of the court. Look at this. What are they? We, the same bench, referred our own decision to a larger bench. And we sat in the larger bench and upturned ourselves. So that attitude, that is the path of correcting yourself. And I believe in this: practice what you preach. Otherwise, nobody is going to listen to you. Practice what you preach. Very plain and simple. And objectivity, of course, with this high ideal in mind, the slok that you have pointed out right at the beginning, nothing goes from here. It is the footprints which you leave behind. So these footprints, they are a remembrance that there have been people who knew how to correct themselves. I was just now telling one of the learned lawyers who was talking about it, of civil courts. Old habits die hard.
Yes.
How many adjournments have you taken? So therefore,
Yes. In fact, Chief, coincidentally, that was the time when I was dealing with petitions of such nature, and I felt it otherwise, but then the bench decision was against me. Thereafter, I found that a larger bench had overturned it, because every case it was half an inch and 1 inch, and it was coming flowing at the rate of 30-40 petitions a day.
yes.
Then ultimately, as you said that, Chief, in fact, in one of the occasions where I was sitting in holding a 482 portfolio, what happened was that a 125 order in some manner came before me by way of a challenge, and the wife was saying that this man is a DSP who is going to retire the next week. So I said that he is going to get some benefits, and probably this is the right time for them to get it settled. So I had sent them to the mediation center immediately. I asked them to be present. I had sent them. So they had gone there. The man had agreed for some settlement. I had posted it 3 days before he retired. Then what happens is that on that day he is not present. His advocate is not present. So the PP says that this is what he agreed before the mediation center, and sort of what happened was immediately, instantaneously, what I did was that I thought that this man is trying to play, because immediately after the settlement goes to him, this lady is not going to get anything. So what I did was something very freaky. I did what I did was I directed the DGP not to permit him to retire and not to give his retirement benefits. Something which was so freaky, even according to me on the day. The previous day, they make a mention, this man comes before the court and he says that I am settling this. And this is the amount which I did. And thereafter, the lady got whatever was due to her. So, as you rightly said, Chief, till it is not injustice to one of the parties and it is rendering justice to a party, I think this is where we have to probably extend the arm of the law and render justice.
But at the same time, it is there also where you have to draw the line.
Yes.
So that you do not transgress the law.
True. Thank you. Thank you.
May I now request Hemalata ma'am to propose the vote of thanks.
A warm and pleasant good evening to one and all. It is a great privilege and honor to be proposing a thanksgiving for today's session by the distinguished speaker for the day, my Lord, the Honorable Chief Justice, Mr. A.P. Shahi, Honorable Judges, senior advocates, friends and colleagues from the bar who logged in today and had the opportunity to listen to a scintillating talk on the topic. Justice is the end and law is the means. The topic as such was very catchy. From the day we as a host started interactions on the topic of interest that can arouse and mutate thoughts into the legal mind. To be very honest, we never had the slightest inkling of thought when we shortlisted about 5 topics of interest to my lords, the Honorable Chief Justice. We were delighted when your lordship graciously consented to address us through this latest technology that has been binding us for the past few months. I should say it was a double delight when your lordship chose on the topic of today. There could not maybe have been a better person than your lordship to articulate the views and thoughts as probing and provoking of legal mind for the topic of the day. We are thankful to my lords once again for having addressed us. It was a blessing boon in disguise. I also take this opportunity to thank all the honorable judges, Justice Vinith Kothari, Justice M.M. Sundaresh, Justice Pushpa Satyanarayana, Justice Vaidyanathan J, Justice R. Subramaniam, Justice Anand Venkatesh, Justice Jagadish Chandra, Justice A.D.J, who have made this occasion all the more special by logging in. I also apologize, my lord, if I omitted to mention any of the judges since I couldn't see them. Then senior advocates have been a guiding influence in the conduct of various webinars, friends and colleagues from the bar who have kept us on our toes throughout as we march towards the light of positivity and good health from this COVID-19 pandemic. I would be failing my duty if I do not thank the president of the MMBA Madurai bench, Mr. Sriveni ma'am, and the office bearers of the association, my colleague and my friend, Mr. Srinivasa Raghavan, for having been a gracious host and providing inputs for the shaping up of the session. To conclude, I thank one and all for having taken time to participate and grace this session. Thank you very much, my lords. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Hema, for giving a short and precise vote of thanks. Generally, after a webinar or seminar, we leave the session with food for brain. But today, I'm sure that we leave the webinar with a heavy food for heart as well as brain also. We are grateful for your lordship's insightful thought. We once again thank one and all for having present here and the chief guest of the day for the meaningful faith. Thank you, my lord, for your lordship's time and energy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.